Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to InFocus, a weekly program where we take a closer look at what's happening within and across the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, your government. Well, the government, of course, is embracing digital transformation to build a smarter, more inclusive and sustainable future. At the center of this effort is a digital transformation management unit, a driving force behind the modernization of the private sector and the public sector indeed. On today's program, we'll learn more about the unit's mandate, its structure, and key partners in the national mission. We'll also get an update on some of the more exciting projects as we sit down with Nigel Carty, Government's Chief Digital Transformation Officer. Stay with us for InFocus, your government, your business. Thanks for staying with us, and allow me now to welcome to the program for the very first time, Mr. Nigel Carty. Welcome, sir. We've done a lot of interviews over the years, but this is your first time on InFocus.
Well, thank you very much, Ian, for having me, and let me say good afternoon to you and the members of your listening and viewing audiences.
Right.
Happy to be here.
So there's so much that we have to cover, so we'll jump right into it. And we spoke about at the top digital transformation. In the context of St. Kitts and Nevis, what does digital transformation look like?
Digital transformation is really a term that means government intensifying its use of digital technologies to improve the way it serves the public. That's what it's about. It's about increasing accessibility, improving inclusivity. Government has to serve people who are here locally, people abroad, people who have various abilities or disabilities. People have different views about different things. And so the main thrust of digital transformation is to ensure that government can serve a wider group of people more efficiently, provide more access, etc.
Okay, and so I mentioned that, of course, the Digital Transformation Management Unit really is at the center of it. Tell us a bit about that unit and your role there.
Yeah, so once the government decided that digital transformation was the way to go, that is, intensifying its use of digital technologies across the government, it recognized that it had to put together a unit which will focus its efforts on doing exactly that, rolling out digital technologies across government to improve service of the government to the people. This is a unit which was put together a little over a year ago, and some of the key skills that people in the unit possess are those who work as program managers, who basically lead on key initiatives across government, interfacing with ministries and government departments and directors and sometimes PSs, ascertaining what their thrusts are, what their priorities are, and seeking to put in place a mechanism to ensure that those plans and programs can be delivered to impact people. We also have process managers. Process managers are people who are focused on determining what the existing processes are that governments and departments are engaged in, and then identifying what the new processes should be like as we move into a digitalized environment. One of the key aspects of the work we do as well is change management. So we have on board someone who leads as change manager. And when we talk about digital transformation, we are talking about mainly transforming people, because we have to transform the way people think, the way people work, and the way people interact with the government. And that takes some changing of minds, reorienting the way people think. But it's also about technological transformation, bringing in new technologies so that government can serve people in the way that it intends to. And lastly, we talk about process transformation, really transforming the way government does business, the way systems work. And critically a part of this is something we call legislative transformation. A lot of the work that we're doing will involve sort of revising existing laws and creating new laws to give effect to the new thrust in relation to the use of technologies.
Let me jump back to change management, because I think that's a very important aspect that needs to be discussed a bit more, especially as it relates to people. Because you find over the years, there are some of the older heads, some of the PSAs, and I'm not really casting aspersion on anyone, but they're a bit more the senior in age, and so they may not be as high-tech or familiar with the technology. And so as well as persons who are also in the departments for quite a while too, they may not have fully embraced the technology. And as you mentioned, there has to be that change of the mindset, but not just change of mindset in terms of people that work there, but change of the mindset of the people who interact with the government, with the service. So tell us a bit about how that is working and what strategies are being used there.
Right, so critically important, you talk about people who work in the public sector, the government sector. They have to become accustomed to a different way of doing things. And part of it is having conversations, giving people an understanding that through our change management process, we are working with people to ease them into the new roles that they should be taking up. It's about exposing people to training and giving them the confidence that you're going to take it step by step to enable them to fill those different roles when they do emerge. But critically important as well, we talk about people in the wider public sector, in the public, who have to become accustomed to interacting with government electronically. We have to phase our approach in doing this. We cannot, in one fell swoop, expect everybody to be able to make use of the technologies. So we're hoping that as we make the transition to have more electronic ways of transacting business with the government, that we leave avenues open, that we leave a window open so that people who don't yet feel comfortable in doing that, that they can use the traditional means of doing that. But we also have to engage in what I would call the advocacy for people to learn to use technology and not be afraid, because a lot of it is really about attitude, right? We can learn so many complex things, but only if we put our minds to those things. And so the change management process will involve how we have these kind of conversations and how we actually design ways and means of easing people into the use of technologies. At the end of the day, not everybody's going to get on board, but if a substantial number of people come on board, then we achieve the objectives that we have set out to achieve. Because I know, for instance, the Department of Social Development, which has taken a lot of its services online as it relates to social benefits, school uniforms, the early childhood subvention, and the like. Of course, they rolled out the online portal. And there was some pushback from persons who are saying, why do we have to go through all of this process? But as I mentioned, the private sector, of course, the focus really is public sector for the unit, but also the private sector must be involved as well too, because they too are changing their systems, and we have to learn to interact and to cross-connect, especially Inland Revenue, which deals with the private sector. They roll out their online payment for licensing, even that. The change is happening in St. Kitts and Nevis. Yes, this is very critical, and you talk about what's happening at social development, for example. You have to show people the carrots as well as the sticks. They have to make changes, but you have to show them what are the benefits in changing? What is the benefit in coming on board, engaging in electronic transaction with the government? And I'm sure when you tell people that if you're going to be subscribing or signing up for uniforms or for, say, some kind of social service, let's say $500 a week or $500 per month, payout that government is extending to people who are in a certain income bracket, you have to show people, look, the process is going to be easier, more confidential. You can renew the process just by staying from home. You can apply from home. You don't have to leave your work and go someplace and sit down and wait for somebody. So you have to show the actual benefits as to why moving in this direction is going to be important for people. It's also important that the private sector get on board. As you said, the government interfaces a lot with the private sector. And when we look at what's happening at Inland Revenue, for example, there are so many businesses who really enjoy being able to do business with the government through some electronic portal. The same thing with Social Security. Mm-hmm. Many businesses around town now are able to file, do their Social Security filings by engaging in electronic interface with the portal at Social Security. So those things are critically important. And it improves efficiency. People use less time. And lots of times there's also a greater degree of transparency and traceability in these transactions.
Which of course leads to accountability,
which
improves
important. Accountability. Transparency improves accountability.
Right. Okay. Now the work is being supported by 4 committees, I understand. Tell us a bit about these committees and the areas that they cover.
Right. So digital transformation, maybe I should take a step back and say that digital transformation is one of the key pillars of the Sustainable Island State Agenda, which you hear the Prime Minister and other members of government talk about so very often. By that we mean that we have to find more sustainable ways of doing business, do things more cost efficiently, do things in a way that leads to more environmental responsibility, taking care of our environment and all the resources, natural resources around us. But digital transformation being what it is, such a critical undertaking, it's important that this initiative is driven by not just a small handful of people, certainly not myself alone, but a group of people who come with their various perspectives to be able to add to the conversation about what should happen and how things should happen. So one of the key committees that we have is a committee called the Architectural Design Committee. In technology, we have to discuss a lot about how things are designed. For example, you have to take security into consideration. How do you build systems that are secure? Because obviously people are going to be having concerns about the security of their information. So this Architecture Design Committee is really to focus on assisting us in making sure that we design systems appropriately, that they're secure, that they seek to manage data in an efficient way. So that's one critically important committee. One other committee is, of course, our Project Oversight Committee. A Project Oversight Committee is focused on ensuring that projects remain within scope, that they are done or completed within timeline, and that all the right resources are being put at the disposal of the project management team to bring the project to its logical and full conclusion. And lastly, we have something called our Information and Data Management Committee, which really is helping a lot with the design of systems with respect to how the data architecture should be set up. So those are just 3 of those committees, but the long and short of it is that we recognize that in the thrust towards digital transformation of the entire government, the conversation has to involve a large portion of our people, a large cross-section of our people, to get the best out of what we're trying to invest in.
Right. And so who, not necessarily the names per se, but in terms of, as in the names of the individuals, but what agencies, are they, what type of experts are on these committees?
So we have members from around various government departments. You talked a while ago about Inland Revenue and the Treasury Department. Those 2 departments in particular have been sort of leading the way for many years in terms of digital transformation. They are very much up to date, very much on the cutting edge, so we draw people from various government departments. You talked a while ago about what's happening in social development, so we have a young man from that department who is on one of our committees. We also have people from the private sector. For example, we have Mr. Rodney Brown from eCaribbean, who's involved, and we have other people from the private sector who are involved. So it's important that we have people who span the gamut of departments in government, especially those that have been in the forefront of digital transformation within their own departments, but also from the private sector, as well as we have people who have backgrounds in law and other things.
And of course, with the private sector involvement, again, it helps with the seamless transition. It helps to keep the public sector systems in line with private sector as
Absolutely,
well,
because the goals we have for digital transformation within the public sector has to align in large measure with what the private sector expects. As you made mention a while ago, Inland Revenue serves the public, serves the private sector in very many ways, and therefore developing systems that sort of meet the expectations and goals of the private sector would be very much in line with what we intend to do.
So the committees, are they expected to be temporary or are they long-term to help to develop the strategy? How will that work?
So the committees are standing committees. They will exist well into the future. Perhaps as time goes by, they'll morph into something different, maybe reduce the numbers, whatever have you, or repurpose them. But they're intended to be there for a long time to be able to help guide us through this, I think, a multi-year digital transformation process.
Mr. Carty, how would you describe the current use of digital technology in the public sector, if you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10?
So within the government sector, the use of digital technology, I would say there's quite a disparity among government departments as to the extent of which they make the use of digital technologies. I made mention a while ago of Inland Revenue, and many people know that you go there, you can pay your taxes online, and more recently, you can license your vehicle online and so forth. You go to the mechanic, they do whatever they have to do, they file that to Inland Revenue electronically and so on. So that's one of the best, I think, more outstanding departments in government. And then there are others who are really not doing anything except having a laptop or a computer, a desktop, people typing away. That's not the most effective use that we can make of technology. So there's quite a disparity, and over time we hope that we can ensure that we can get more government departments and ministries to be making the use of technology in a way that really helps them to serve the public more efficiently and more effectively.
Right, and that actually links to my next question, which would be the measures that are being taken to ensure that there is buy-in from staff within the public sector, that they're informed of what the government's intention is, that they are sufficiently trained and updated in terms of these type of initiatives.
Right, so we did speak about the committees a while ago, and the committees draw their membership from various government departments, and through that we're hoping that government departments would be up to speed with what we're doing. We can charge members of the committee to go back, engage in advocacy across their own ministries. We're hoping as well to engage in public sector-wide engagements about what digital transformation is, helping departments to identify what their priorities are, and helping them to understand how digital transformation can assist them in discharging their responsibilities to the public. So it's a work in progress, and we intend to do that.
Okay, all right, and so we're going to talk a bit now about some of the more critical projects, and I think the one that will affect everyone the most, which would be the digitization of the civil registry that covers births, deaths, marriages, etc. But before we do that, we're going to take our first break.
Okay, thank you very much.
Stay with us, viewers and listeners. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome welcome back to InFocus. We continue our discussion with Mr. Nigel Carty, who is government's Chief Digital Transformation Officer. Now, Mr. Carty, before we left, we spoke about some projects that the department is going to be undertaking, the government itself too. And I just want to mention the top 5, and I'll ask you to give a bit about each of them before I come back and get into the specifics of each of them. And so they are the digitization of civil registry. There is the electronic identification. There's an online passport application, single window, which includes paperless trade, and also data protection laws. And of course, the last one in particular is very important. So let's jump back to the digitization of the civil registry. Tell us a bit about that.
Right. So the civil registry, that's where people go to get their birth certificate, et cetera, et cetera. That project is very much on the way, is at an advanced stage. This involves the digitization of the records. So, you know, sometimes you want to go and you want to extract a passport. And one of the things you need to do is to get a birth certificate. So you make your way up to the Basti Health Center, and somebody sits down and transcribes from a book a certificate and signs that certificate.
Having to gone through files and files and files.
Having had to go through files and files and so forth. And one of the important things that your intervention reminded me of is these files have existed since the mid-1800s. So we're talking about records that go back to as far as 1852, in fact. Hundreds of thousands of records. And of course, it's paper, so there is some expectation that over time you're going to have an impact. Papers are rotting, writing is fading, et cetera, et cetera. So it's critically important that we digitize those records. So we're at an advanced stage where we're actually scanning the documentation as we speak. So right now as we speak, there are people down there actually scanning the documentation and putting that into a computer system. When that is done, what it means is that maybe not immediately as in tomorrow on next month, but it means at some point in time, people will be able to make an application for their passport, for their birth certificate online. And so you can get that in an electronic format. In the first instance though, you would be able to go to that office and somebody would be able to just take some kind of documentation from you, who you are and so forth, and punch something into a system rather than leaving through piles and piles of books and so on and pages, would be able to just at a click of a mouse print your birth certificate. But in the long run, the idea is to have these birth certificates issued electronically. But that also feeds into the online passport application process. Because
but before you jump into that, I want to just stay with the civil registry aspect of it, because of course, birth certificates in particular, they're very important. We need them for a lot of IDs.
Right.
And one of the IDs that come to mind really is the National Identification Card. And of course, that was established under your time when you were a Minister of Government. And of course, there are reports, investigations that have been done in terms of persons who would have fraudulently obtained some of these, which forced the birth certificate, the registry, to change a lot of the ways and how these things are issued to persons. So how do you protect against these things happening within your digital system?
Yeah, a very important question, Ian. Anything that is paper can be reproduced. It's just a matter of how much skill you have in doing the reproduction, and then you'll be able to use that piece of documentation to do whatever you want to do. And that's one of the things that we want to avoid or minimize, reduce to a minimum. So these documents are going to be electronically stored and electronically issued. Therefore, the tendency for those documents to be reproduced in a manner that allows people to fake these documents is going to be reduced. One of the ways in which that is going to happen is that you present yourself to, say, the passport office. At some point in the future, the passport office is not going to be asking you to bring your birth certificate, right? The passport office will be able to electronically interact with the civil registry to retrieve your information based on the basic information you provide when you go to the passport office. So you minimize the opportunity for people to interfere with a document, a paper document, and you go straight to the source. And so that is going to be critically important going forward.
Because there are some persons who question, well, I already got a passport and presented the birth certificate. Why do I need to bring a birth certificate? To renew the passport, it's already was there.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's kind of important because there have been instances where people would have received a passport on a fraudulent basis. And so you sometimes have to subject the entire population to having to bring a birth certificate time and time again just to make sure that you can prevent the person who would have gotten the passport fraudulent in the first place from being able to renew it. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem completely, but it is at least part of the process that they've put in place so that they can do their best in trying to mitigate those kind of things.
And you may not be able to answer this now, but also in terms of like who can access the information if say a parent of mine were to pass, and because that's very important in terms of the death certificate, who might be able to advance whether the funeral planning or to make a claim for whatever might have been left behind. Those things really will need to be managed carefully. So is that built into the system as well, or is that among the registry staff to develop those systems?
So one of the things we're doing right now is revising the civil registry legislation, the legislation which relates to birth certificates and death certificates, and that piece of legislation is being revised. All right? And it is being revised, taking some of those things into consideration. But essentially, it is going to stipulate very strongly who can access these records. For example, it is going to stipulate that even people who work in the office cannot just go into the computer system and start looking for people's information. You can say, well, I know Ian, and I saw Ian the other day. I wonder how old Ian is. Let me go and check his records. That will be proscribed in law, those kind of things. So, and in addition to that piece of legislation I just spoke about, we're also talking about data protection. There is data protection legislation which was passed, which has not yet been activated, but we're looking at that. And the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank is also working with the various countries within the region to create harmonized data protection legislation. And it will contemplate how people treat with all this kind of data.
We're going to come back to that as well too. But let me move now to electronic ID. How will that work? Because there's some persons who don't know what an electronic ID is.
Right, so let me start by saying what electronic ID is. Electronic ID or digital ID is an electronic way of offering proof of your identity. When you go to the bank or to a government department, often you're asked to present an ID or two. So you take your national ID card or your driver's license or your social security card or your passport and you say, hi, this is me. The problem with presenting documentation like that is that they can be faked, right? So somebody can fake a national ID or a driver's license. That happens all the time. So the digital ID is going to provide a mechanism whereby people can provide proof of their identity electronically. And there is very little scope for tampering because these systems are designed electronically to be very secure. So it will initially be through a card, but the electronic ID can also be issued through an app. So in the future, maybe 5 years down the road, a little longer or shorter, depending on how things go, you can have your ID as an app on your phone. Also, sometimes people use smart cards, right, that they can plug into some system that they can use to authenticate themselves. But the reason why digital ID is critically important is that, one, you want to reduce fraud, but you also want to improve convenience for people. How do I, if government is engaged in digital transformation and making services available online, how then do people authenticate themselves online? If, for example, I want to apply for uniform assistance from the social development department, how do I authenticate myself from home, except I have some form of digital identification? So you'll be able to use maybe a card reader, slip that into your thing, or as we say, you can have an app on your phone which does that, or some other kind of mechanism. But you have to be able to provide an option for people to be able to indicate who they are in an authentic way through some digital means.
So a critical question that follows up after that would be, who will it be issued to? Because of course there is that challenge, right? In the United States, for instance, when you're born there, you get a social security number. The question always is that for the younger persons, the students in particular, the CFB, they have an ID that is produced, but in high school you don't have an ID.
Right.
Unless you have a passport, because you can't drive, so there's no license. You don't work, so there's no social security card. So how do they prove that they are what they say they are, even though they are under the age?
Right. So this is some of the policy discussion that is taking place, and there are recommendations which we are going to make, but there are final decisions that have to be taken by the policymakers. The idea, though, is that everybody age 5 and above, citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis, will be eligible to receive an electronic ID. So just as kids are getting into school, they'll be receiving the ID, and they'll have that for a lifetime. Of course, the card will be renewed, but the ID will remain the same. The same unique identification number, etc., etc. You may have an update of somebody's photo in the system, etc. But the intention is to start that very early. Part of the contemplation as well is that children who are born in St. Kitts and Nevis, as the day of their birth, when their birth is being registered, they'll be issued a unique number, so that that number will go with them throughout the rest of their lives. So we are thinking about how we issue that number from the get-go, and that is part of what we are contemplating in the development of the civil registry system, because the registration takes place in that system. So we have to think about that. And then we have to think about citizens by investment, citizens through naturalization. We have to think about issuing them a unique number as well, and thinking about how we get those people maybe a year or two from now to be part of the set of people who will receive an ID. Not everybody will receive an EID initially. Residents, for example, we may have to wait a little while. But that's a decision to be taken by the policymakers. So I'm just saying that those are some of the matters that have been taken into consideration, but a final decision will be made as to what group of people will be issued the ID.
And that's actually very progressive. I like the idea of taking the time to get it right, because I just mentioned some of the challenges. Those things can be overcome if you're doing a new system. This should be overcome. There shouldn't be challenges that existed back in the 80s, back in the 70s, that exist today. It's modern St. Kitts and Nevis. Right. Okay. So in terms of the way we do business locally and then internationally, how will that electronic ID impact that?
So the electronic ID, well, let me start by saying that throughout the world there is a movement towards electronic identity. Right? And part of the thinking, part of the contemplation is that these IDs, if they are being built or produced to a certain standard, they can actually help with the movement of people throughout the world. So rather than using a passport, you can use your ID, and you can use that subsequently down the road. It will be good for travel, not just within the region, but throughout the world. Again, once it is built to certain standards. As you know, travel documents like passports and so on, they have to be built to a certain standard. They use the ICAO standard. So once these cards, IDs, are being built to a certain standard, they can be used to help people to move around the world. But at the same time, they can be used to authenticate you on all sorts of platforms. So just as you can use your credit card to do a transaction on Amazon, wherever that is, or on eBay, or wherever in the world, so too, you'll be able to provide your identity or proof of your identity online. And I was listening to Bill Gates just recently talking about how important it's going to be in the future for people who are presenting information online would be able to authenticate themselves in a way that people know that the person putting out this information is a real person, or people selling this product online are real people, and people who can be identified and held to account if needs be.
Because something very basic that Amazon does in its review system is a verified purchaser. So if you purchase the product, of course, they will know that you purchased it.
Right.
So you can't just go on and say you're going to give a product a bad review because you have an issue or it's a personal vendetta.
Right.
You're verified purchaser, it gives you more credibility.
Absolutely.
Because you've used the product and tested it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So something that, as we speak about travel, of course, and you touched on it earlier, the online passport applications.
Yes, the online passport application system. So as we think about electronic identity, as we think about ECRS, which is the electronic civil register system, we just talked about the birth certificates and so on. The next natural thing to think about is how then do we combine those to create an online passport application system so that citizens who are here, who don't care to go to the office and stand in a line, or citizens abroad, wherever they are, in Germany, in Taiwan, and we know we have citizens all over the world these days, they'll be able to make a passport application online. If they have the EID, and if the ECRS, or the birth certificate office, is connected electronically, and we're also working on the police records office or criminal records office, you wouldn't any longer have to go to the post office, pick up some stamps, go by the police to get your record, go by the birth certificate office to get your birth certificate. All of that will be rolled into one online process. You present your identity, the systems are interconnected, and therefore the relevant information to support your application will be drawn from the various systems to compile your application, which will come with a higher level of authenticity or proof of the fact that these are authentic, because there's very little opportunity for people to make interventions and maybe forge a document. So the process will be quicker, and it should give people a lot more confidence in the system in terms of the travel document that we use.
So does the civil registry system have to be online? Does the EID have to be online before this is introduced?
So the EID system will be online. It operates in an online way, because part of the way people get authenticated is that just as when you go to a bank and use your credit card, or you go to TDC, you use your credit card has information which connects you to the bank with which you have the credit card.
But let me just clarify, when I say online, I meant live. Do the systems have to be live before the passport application system come into place?
So the systems have to be accessible electronically. But if the question is, can we have an online passport application system without having an interoperability between the passport application system and the civil registry system? No. But you'll be limited in some ways, because how then do you provide your birth certificate? You will have to upload it. So you can go and get your birth certificate and you can upload it. But I think it partly defeats the purpose. But I think your thinking is right, because it may be one of the steps we take before we actually get to the destination we want to get to, where people can get these records, their police record, their birth certificate, and then they can upload these to the portal, right? But it would really be much better, especially for people who are resident abroad, to have all of these systems interconnected so you can draw the information automatically.
All right, and then would it also, when it's online and when everything is completed, would that include initial applicants, first-time applicants, or will it be used for renewals?
Right, so if the digital ID is up and running for persons who have the EID, it should be straightforward, even for first-time applicants. Some of the checks and balances which we have currently in the passport application process would be something like getting someone to, as a recommender, someone who can vouch that this is Ian Richards, I know him, and so on and so on. All those things can be done electronically. So you're going to have some mechanism whereby you go online, you start your passport application, but then you need to send a link to a verifier. You put in the person's email or whatever have you, and the person then provides the verification or the recommendation that you need, right? And then when that comes back to you, you then complete the passport application process. So yes, it will be for first time as well as repeat applicants.
And that's very important, because as you mentioned, we have people all over the world.
Yes.
And if you're a student studying in Taiwan, for instance, and your passport expires, you don't have to wait to be able to send your passport or whatever. You can get it done online
Right.
eventually, and that will be a big help. Okay, so we move on now to the single window or paperless trade.
So one of the very important things that we're trying to do is we're working with the Commonwealth Office. Let me say that. We are working with the Commonwealth Office. And let me also make mention of some of the other ministries whom we're involved with. We're involved with the Ministry of International Trade. We're involved with the Customs Department. And yes, we're working with the Commonwealth Office in London to conduct a review of our laws with a view to ensuring that we can support what we call e-trade, paperless trade. There's a mission from the Commonwealth Office that comes here in November, around November 10th to the 14th, and they'll be working with persons in government departments, also a range of stakeholders, Chamber of Industry and Commerce, banks, ISPs or internet service providers, etc., trying to glean, well, what is it that you would need to see as we seek to transform the landscape with respect to trade. And so that's critically important. So it's about changing the laws so that people can file information electronically, people can request information electronically, that people can exchange information with service providers and producers around the world, and providing a single window whereby you have a one-stop shop. So exporters, whether you're exporting produce, potatoes or yams, etc., or you're exporting meat or importing flowers or whatever have you, there'll be a single portal for you to do that. In the past, or currently, what happens is that depending on what you are importing or exporting, you need approval from the chief vet or from somebody of that sort. The idea is that you'll go online, you'll file your documentation. Whomsoever needs to give an approval will see the documentation, will give the approval, right, or make arrangements to inspect or whatever have you, and then they'll give the approval electronically, and then that just goes through. Again, this ensures that all of the information that is relevant to the transaction is in one place, and in terms of transparency and accountability and so on, with all the information being there, we can determine, things from there.
Right, and of course that system is used overseas, so it will not be unique. It's not something new. It will just be new to St. Kitts and Nevis.
Yes.
And of course we'll be able to rely on the best practices. And one of the best practices that we have seen in terms of a one-stop shop, if you use that term, is Skipper.
Yeah.
Skipper has been very successful over the years in being able to counter that and offer that service for persons to have them rather than running here, there, and everywhere.
In terms of establishing, setting up businesses.
Right,
Yeah.
right, okay. And then finally, and you hinted at it as well too, in terms of data protection. Now, the legislation, the systems that need to be in place to protect our information, because if I'm going to be online and having all my business done, I need to ensure that my business is being done in a safe and secure way.
Yeah, so data protection is extremely critical, right? I made mention earlier of the fact that there has been data protection legislation on the books that has not been activated. But at the same time, we're seeking to review that, as well as we are working with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank in an initiative to create harmonized legislation for data protection throughout the region. The central bank is important because, of course, it serves the entire region or sub-region, but it also has the wherewithal to bring its expertise to bear in creating legislation for data protection. As you know, the financial sector is one of those critical areas for data protection, but it's not limited to the financial world. It is for everything that we do. But suffice it to say, the matter of data protection is very much at the back of the government's mind, and it's one of those things that we're actively working on.
And it becomes more complicated with artificial intelligence.
Yes. So artificial intelligence, as you know, has its good and its bad. And one of the things artificial intelligence is being used for in a malicious way is to penetrate secure systems. So every day, people may not know that, but every day there are bad actors around the world who are seeking to intrude our banks here, government systems, treasury, inland revenue, they're constant attacks. And artificial intelligence can be exploited for that purpose. So it means that the government is going to have to do a lot more to improve its cybersecurity posture. In other words, we're going to have to invest a bit more in developing and installing systems that can prevent these kinds of unlawful intrusions. So it's very critical. And as we talk about whole of government digital transformation, all that means is that a lot more of government's digital assets are going to be online. People's information would be at the risk of exposure, just like your bank information. Your bank information is at the risk of exposure. And it falls to the bank to do all it can to ensure that it protects your data and protects its business interest.
And so that is why the networking and the linkages with international and regional agencies such as ECCB, as you mentioned, is critical because, of course, they have the expertise, they have the best practices that we can borrow, and the networks as well too.
Yes, and standards are important. International standards are important because international standards contemplate a lot of these things that we've been talking about, a lot of the cybersecurity risk and other things and so on. So standards are important, international best standards.
Right. So where will the data be stored? Is it going to be local storage? Well, if you care to share that, I'm not sure how much you would want to share based on the sensitivity of what we're discussing. But is it going to be local storage systems? Is there going to be a cloud system? How is that going to be done?
So the critical data will be stored locally. I guess that people already know that there's some systems that both your banks and government sector store in the cloud, non-critical data. So some of our websites, for example, are deployed in the cloud with Amazon, right, web services. But when it comes to critical data, we believe in data sovereignty. The data must be within our borders. At the same time, while we are thinking about that, we have to think about data redundancy because we are a small country subject to hurricanes, and we're in the hurricane season. I think we had some notice published recently about a hurricane that is coming our way.
Jerry, yeah.
For our small size and for how vulnerable we are to those kinds of disasters, it's going to be important that we think about how we replicate data so that if one place is destroyed or flooded out, we don't lose all of our data. So we have to kind of mix and match what we do with our data. Okay,
Mr. Carty, we are up against the clock, so we're going to take a break, a final break, and then we'll just be able to wrap up our interview. There's a lot more that I have to ask you, but we'll see how best we can move forward with the limited time. Stay right there. We'll be right back with more In Focus.
If you haven't done it as yet, please do it today. Subscribe to our YouTube page at SKNIS Media for regular updates, live coverage, and even more information on your government. While you're at it, like, share, and interact with our Facebook and Instagram pages at SKNIS Media and SKNIS Info.
Welcome back to In Focus. We continue our discussion with the government's Chief Digital Transformation Officer, Nigel Carty. Now, let's jump right back into it. As I mentioned, there's so much that we have to get through. I want to touch back on that issue in terms of the data and the collection of data. There are some persons who may be concerned that the data will be shared with third-party sources, maybe for marketing purposes or promotional. What's in place to deal with that?
Right. So I think that citizens who are wise would understand the importance of government protecting their data and putting into law that people's information would not be given to other entities. And that is why it's critically important that people participate in the political process, that we make what we think are objective critiques of the system. Even if you support the government of the day, if you have objective criticism, give it. But it's going to be critically important that we advocate that our information is never passed on to anybody else.
Right. Okay. And so Let's move on to something else that, as you mentioned, apps. There is consideration and work being done to develop a consumer affairs app.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about that.
Right. So the Consumer Affairs app came out of the government's desire to provide information at people's fingertips to be able to make the best purchasing decisions, particularly in relation to basic goods. We live in a capitalistic society, and part of what that means is that supermarkets charge whatever they think they can charge, having some regard for the competition, But what government has been careful to do is to keep a monitor on the movement of prices. What we're now doing is putting that information in an app so that people can make determinations about where to shop for what kinds of goods that they need. So you would want to buy your milk, say at Rams, or your potatoes at Hospital Valley Mart, whatever. The app is going to give you some visibility into where you have the lowest cost for these important items.
And so this will basically be a newly redesigned app, because of course there was one several years ago, but I'm not sure how many persons made use of it. And critically important as well will be persons buying into using that app, because we know the cost of living committee, they would make promotional material suggesting, instead of buying brand, perhaps you can consider an alternative. Of course, they're not telling anyone,
right?
Because it's still our choice. It's
Yes.
a free country. We can make whatever decisions we want how in terms of we spend our monies, making sure, of course, that it is within the legal way.
Yeah.
So the suggestions were made, and so persons will need to understand that the information is just being provided. It is
Yes.
still up to you to make the decisions.
Yes. So we believe that information empowers people. And so we are trying to put the information at people's fingertips so that they can make the best transactional decisions for themselves. Part of what is going to be helpful is to have apps that are designed in a user-friendly way. We have put a lot of effort into designing an app that is easy to use, so that the old mamas and papas would say, well, this is easy to use. I could look this up on the thing and so on. I want to see where I could get the cheapest milk because I need to use my milk and so on. So design is very important.
Right.
But also, training, advocacy, advertisement are also going to be important to support that.
Right. Okay. Let's talk now a bit, as you referred to, the usability of these things in terms of, is there going to be some sort of a strategy to help to get those persons who are not too familiar with technology online and being able to take advantage and understand the importance of using these new systems? Because, of course, there are vulnerable sectors in our society.
Yes.
Persons with disabilities, persons who are elderly, persons who are even too young and will not be academically inclined as well too. What strategies in place here?
Right. So my own experience has taught me that once people are able to get their hands on a device, it doesn't matter how well they can read or not. And I'm convinced that a lot of people have learned to read or at least improve their reading skills through the use of technology. I've seen a lot of people who I knew had some difficulties. I taught some of them and so on. I know some of them. But when they're communicating with me on WhatsApp, I can tell that over the years, they have improved their ability to read because the technology forces them into a mode where they have to do that. So I am convinced that once you put an app that is highly usable in front of someone, highly usable, they're going to be able to use that. But we also have plans for outreach to various communities. For example, we're going to be having town hall meetings where we're going to engage with the group of disabled people or people who are differently abled, and we're going to take that to various communities and so on and find ways and means to engage people, why the app and how easy it is to use and so on.
In a conversation I had one time with the senior minister, Dr. Douglas, Honorable Dr. Douglas, is that, of course, as you speak about user-friendly, there must be a reason why you'd want to be able to use this app. And I know that he mentioned that there was consideration that was being done to a rating system, in the sense that, for instance, persons who provide services, whether it be carpentry, landscaping, whatever, it's so difficult to get persons to live up to their commitment, understanding that you're actually paying them for a service and you're not begging them to come and do the work. That a rating system could be included in there. Something like, as I mentioned, a verified purchaser. So you can say, I work with plumber A, he's reliable, he's on time, he's cost effective, etc. Is that something under consideration?
So for this particular app and its accompanying website, because there's a website that accompanies this as well, and the ability to search for prices will be on both the app and the website. One of the things that the Consumer Affairs Department have said to me is that they've always had difficulties in people filing complaints. They hear people on the radio talking about the problems they have and so on, and they're on Facebook talking about they went to this place or to that place and they got bad service or whatever have you and so on. But they have not been following through in using the facility which is available to file the complaints. One of the things that we're doing in this app and website is to provide the means for people to file complaints, and we really hope that people use that. So although we don't have a rating system for the time being, we are hoping that we can have people file their complaints and that the consumer affairs officers can take up those with people and actually find, because the laws already make provisions for the Consumer Affairs Department and the government to be able to deal with people in a punitive way for abusing their consumers.
Right. Okay, and so with just about 4 minutes left, Mr. Carty, you already touched on the importance of the digital transformation and transforming St. Kitts into a sustainable island state. So instead I will ask you then is that, let's say 10 years from now, that would be 2035, excuse me, where do you see St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of digital innovation? Because it's important that we not just consume content, we create it as well too, and also in service delivery.
Right. So in 10 years from now, I expect to see a lot more people who would, because one of the things we are doing on the digital transformation is focusing on people transformation. It's not just about technology, it's about people. How do we get people to take to training in the various areas of technology? So we want people to get training in AI to support what we're doing. Cybersecurity, because government will have a greater need for cybersecurity services. We want people who will go and get trained in networks and application development and so on. So I hope to see a lot more people in St. Kitts and Nevis who are not just trained in those areas, but providing their services and skills to support what the government is doing and to provide services to the private sector as well. I think that in 10 years from now, we're going to see government having improved itself tremendously in terms of the way it serves people, so that little things that you now have to go to a government department for, you can stay at home and interact with the government and get the service done. We also hope that by the systems we put in place, not only do the systems work to allow people to interface with the government, but when people actually interface with a government officer, for example, that the quality of service is much better. We are hoping to use artificial intelligence to help government to more appropriately respond to people. So for example, you call in to the government to ask, I applied for a passport 5 weeks ago, I haven't gotten it yet, what is the answer? Artificial intelligence systems will help us to make appropriate responses. And as a last resort, to at least have someone available to pick up a phone to answer you, but at least using artificial intelligence to improve the quality of service as well. Service delivery, I talked about that as well.
Because that's important. If you submit a document, many times you're wondering what's happening with the document. If you can go on and see it's at stage A, stage B, stage C.
Absolutely.
That helps to provide.
You'll have greater visibility as to where you are in the process, where your application is.
And that also will assist with, of course, the ranking of ease of doing business, because that's critically important for a small island developing state like St. Kitts and Nevis, which is transitioning to a sustainable island state.
Critically important, Ian. Businesses are going to come here if we have the infrastructure. The technological infrastructure is one of the important pieces of infrastructure that we need to have to support and attract businesses.
Right. Okay. Any final comments you'd like to make, Mr. Carty?
Yeah, so I really want to thank you, Ian, for giving me this opportunity to speak about what the government is doing on the digital transformation front. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his leadership and vision. That has been very, very clear, and he continues to speak about the potential for digital transformation to assist him and his government in creating a sustainable island state. I also want to thank the Minister, Honorable Conway Maynard, Minister of Technology, for providing his guidance and being clear-eyed about what we have to achieve and providing all the support that is necessary to achieve that. And I want the public to be clear that in the next couple of weeks and very frequently thereafter, to be engaged in conversations with us. For example, we're having a town hall meeting at the Newtown Community Center, I think around October 21st or 23rd. We'll send it out, but we want people to participate, give ideas, understand, and in some ways, if necessary, push back and demand that better be done or that so-and-so be done to ensure that we are all pleased with what comes out at the end.
Right. And certainly we would want to encourage persons to go out and make that intervention, because many times we are content to sit back and do nothing, and then we argue that we were not consulted or it doesn't meet our needs when we didn't take advantage of the opportunity. Right. So we'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Carty, for appearing on this edition of InFocus, and certainly we'd love to have you back as we advance along the way to discuss more and share more and get the public further updated.
Yeah, thank you, Ian.
We'd like to thank you, viewers and listeners, also for being with us for this edition of InFocus, which was said you will join us next week at the same place, at the same time for another edition. Remember, it's InFocus, your government, your business. I'm Ian Richards.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.